The first comes from, the first comes from 1 Samuel in the 8th chapter. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel reported all of the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and then to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them to the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and set a king over them." Samuel then said to the people of Israel, "Each of you return home." The gospel reading is from the gospel according to Mark, and this is in the 3rd chapter. When he went home and the crowd came together again, so that they could not even eat. When his family heard of it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, "He has gone out of his mind." And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He is Beelzebul, and the other ruler of the demons, he casts out demons." And he called them to him and spoke to them in parables. "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter the strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly, I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins and whatever blasphemies they utter, but whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of eternal sin, for they have said he has an unclean spirit. This is the wisdom of God. I believe in stories. I believe stories provide meaning and truth. The Bible is full of stories, but it also has a larger story, sometimes called a meta story or a meta narrative. And the meta story of the Hebrews is rooted in the experience of Exodus. That is, the experience of being enslaved in Egypt and then to be liberated. This story continues when they wander through the wilderness. We all know this story. And the people begin to question Moses. And Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, and they're wondering about Moses. And they build a golden calf, and they say, Moses wants to be king. He wants to be Pharaoh. After the Hebrews settled in the land of Canaan, they did not have a king. During the period of Judges, they were organized into tribes, and if something came up, if there was a battle that had to be fought or a dispute, then a judge, God would raise up a judge to deal with the situation. They were more the wise ones and the conscience of the people. One of those judges was Samuel, which brings us to the lectionary, Old Testament lectionary for today. As it said, the people demanded to have a king. The story fills the whole chapter of chapter 8. The primary reason they wanted a king is because they looked around and saw that other countries around them all had kings and thought that the only way to be a powerful country or nation in the world is to have a king. Parenthetically, I have to say this. I read the chapter from verse 4, and the lectionary left out verses 1 through 3. 1 through 3 say this. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel, yet his sons did not follow his way, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. I guess the lectionary people did not want that to be there. But it's really intriguing because that kind of tells you why the people may have wanted to have a king, because there was already biblical nepotism going on. One can imagine the people saying, well, if you're going to do that, we might as well have a king. The first king was Saul. That didn't go very well. The next one was David, and he was great, they say, but he had a little problem with Bathsheba. Solomon was king at the height of Israel. He was wonderful, they say, great and just and wise, almost like he was a prophet and a king, but I don't buy it. The whole book of 1 Kings is about Solomon. The second book of Kings is about all the other kings, which was a mixed blessing. When introduced, the next king, they always included his name, age, date of his reign, mother's name, and the last one was whether he did right by God or not. I went through there and I took an informal tally, and I'm pretty sure that 10 of the kings did right by God, 18 were evil. I wonder if we could speak of our presidents that way sometime. Wouldn't that be fun to decide which ones did right by God and which ones didn't, and it'd give us a chance to again say that Trump didn't do right by God. Marcus Borg has always said that there are two traditions running through the Old Testament. One is the tradition of the monarchy. The other is that of the prophets. They don't always get along. During the time of the kings, there were prophets who would keep the kings in check. Elijah, Elisha. What we have in this text from 1 Samuel is a story of great tension between the kings and the prophets, tension between Samuel and the people, tension between the people and God. And what does God say to Samuel about this monarchy? I'm going to read this again from the message. Let them have their way, but warn them of what they're in for. Tell them the way kings operate, just what they're getting from a king. He'll take your sons and make them soldiers, charity, cavalry, infantry, regimented into battalions and squadrons. He'll put some to forced labor on his farms, plowing and harvesting, and others to making either weapons of war or chariots in which he can ride in luxury. He'll put your daughters to work as beauticians and waitresses and cooks. He'll conscript your best fields, vineyards, and orchards and hand them over to special friends. He'll tax your harvest and vintage to support his extensive bureaucracy. He'll prize your prize workers and best animals he'll take for his own use. He'll lay a tax on your flocks, and you'll end up no better than slaves. The day will come when you will cry in desperation because of this king you so much want for yourselves, but don't expect God to answer. There's definitely a good amount of political theater going on in this text in Mark. Actually, in the whole Gospel of Mark. Jesus has come home, and when he meets his family, they restrain him. They're embarrassed. He stepped out of the way you're supposed to act in their society, and people have said that he lost his mind and that he is Beelzebul, the ruler of demons. And Jesus responds, how can Satan be cast out himself? If Satan is risen up again against himself, he is divided and he cannot stand. His end has come. With this, Jesus is telling them that they're on the wrong side of the divide. Jesus is the prophet, the scribes are the kings, and Jesus' own family support the kings. Does that sound familiar today for any of you? And then there's this line. But no one can enter the strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed, the house can be plundered. Sometimes I wish Jesus had not spoken in parables and been just a little bit more direct. A favorite commentary on Mark, the Gospel of Mark, is by Ched Myers, and it is entitled, Binding Up the Strong Man, a political reading of Mark's story of Jesus. For Myers, looking at Mark through the lens of political relationships, he asks about the dynamics of power involved. The scribes are the ones in power, along with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Jesus there represents the poor and the marginalized. In Mark, an important part of Jesus' ministry is what's called naming the powers. Naming the powers. So who is the strong man for Mark? It's not Satan. He represents those in power. No, it is the Romans and the Jewish elite. In other words, the kings. Myers says this. Mark has come clean. Jesus, aka the stronger one, heralded by John, intends to overthrow the reign of the strong man, the scribal establishment represented by the demon. This dynamic of prophets and kings extended into Christian history, particularly after Constantine made Christianity the religion of the empire. It's heightened in the Middle Ages when kings and popes were in constant rivalry. Charlemagne made the Pope crown him king of the Holy Roman Empire in 800. A few hundred years later, the popes were living like kings. All you have to do is go watch the TV show called The Borgias. A prophet was risen up. God raised up a prophet in the midst of all of that to judge them, and his name was Martin Luther. There's a good TV show about Martin Luther, too. A little while later, it was Pope Clement VII battling with Henry VIII over the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn, and he just made another church to be king and prophet. But no, there are prophets that were risen at that time, too, Thomas More, for example. So can we imagine Jesus staging political theater? According to Myers, Jesus was forcing the issue. He was being assertive, even aggressive. And what was the issue? The power dynamics and unjust relationships between the kings and the prophets, those in power and those left out. In Bible study, we just got done reading the epistle to the Ephesians. The image of Jesus presented in Ephesians is Lord of the cosmos. As in the Gospel of John and Ephesians, Jesus is seen to be with God at the very beginning. Ephesians is not staging any political theater. Ephesians is staging cosmic theater. There are reasons for this. Circumstances and relationships are different. The church felt it needed to compete with the Roman Empire and be able to say, we may seem like a small political movement, but we have the truth. You all are wrong. And we were there, and Jesus was there from the beginning. Caesar is not Lord of the cosmos. Jesus is Lord. To imagine Christ as Lord of the cosmos brings a feeling of, I think, some assurance, maybe a little supremacy. One of the original declarations of faith in the early church was, now Jesus is Lord of all. Ephesians Christians did not want political theater because that would have brought them strife. They had their reasons. But in the Bible study, we came up with saying, but where's the Jesus who loves the poor? Where's the Jesus who stands up for the forgotten? Need to say there are many images of Jesus in the New Testament, not just one. Jesus is not monolithic. Another of my favorite books is Christ Through the Centuries by Jaroslav Pelikan. Even after the Bible was canonized, there were images of Jesus were always born out of communities and experiences, and they are different. And Pelikan says we need to honor all of them. In our day, I believe we need to assert again the Jesus who stages political theater in order to look at our political drama and theater. We need to consider what it means to bind up the strong man. And it's poignant for us to ask in the spirit of Jesus, who are the kings of our time and who are the prophets of our time? We need to, in other words, be naming the powers. How is this power dynamic working out in our world between the prophets and the kings? How do we balance our desire to have a king with the care for the poor? The cosmic Christ, while glorious, isn't the one to champion the poor. He's busy battling the elemental spirits of the cosmos. You must know that when I read again in Mark about binding up the strong man, my ire increased as I had dreams of Donald Trump being tied up and gagged. Now, my first response is, that's not nice, you can't do, but on the other hand, something in me said, this is necessary still. Do we think this is over? Liz Cheney said recently that ignoring Trump won't work, and I think she's right. Trump has always imagined himself to be the king. He even commented once that he didn't want to wear a mask because people who are like leaders and presidents and dictators don't do that. Some of you will recall another movie, The Man Who Would Be King. Anybody know? It's an old movie, The Man Who Would Be King. And it's Sean Connery and Michael Caine, and they're two men who cross the Himalayas, I guess, into Tibet, but it's all fiction. Anyway, the people there, for some reason, believe that the Connery character is semi-divine, and they make him king. But he's a strong man. He felt no responsibility for anybody but himself. Then they discover that he bleeds, and they immediately bound him up and got rid of him. We need this image of Jesus in Mark who feels anger, righteous anger, and the desire to bind up the strong man who will do so much harm. Where is this Jesus in the political machinations of our world in America today? Who are the kings in our world, and who are the prophets? The reason for the big lie is Trump really believes he should be king. As a malignant narcissist, he really believes he won the election. He cannot accept defeat. He's a strong man. He is king. How else do we explain this? Feels like we're amongst the Israelites once again, shouting at Samuel, "We want a king." And here again, God's warning about kings is apt. He'll take your sons and make them soldiers and send them to Iraq. And your daughters will be waitresses and cooks, have to work 2 jobs with 2 kids and no health insurance. He'll conscript your best fields, and somehow Monsanto will get all of them. He'll tax your harvest at a higher rate than himself and his cronies. He'll take your best workers and animals, and the best and the brightest will all wander into the financial sector. Is Jeff Bezos a king? Would God maybe want us to break up Amazon? Bill Gates, is he a king? Well, yeah, he kind of is, because he has a Bathsheba moment right now. We have an issue with strong men today all over the world. Our own Donald, Vladimir Putin. There are also strong men in Turkey, Syria, Myanmar, Hungary, Brazil, Nicaragua, Congo, India, China. Is that enough? The desire for authoritarian monarchical power is on the rise in the world. I don't think the will to have kings worked out very well for the Israelites. I know it won't work for us. We need prophets, not kings. Who are the prophets? Black Lives Matter is a prophetic movement. Number of Republicans in Congress have acted prophetically, like Liz Cheney, who I totally disagree with, but I am so thankful for her prophetic voice. Stacey Abrams is a prophet. She's also a United Methodist. So who else do you think are the prophets, large and small? I want you to really tell me. I'll give you my email, osujim040@gmail.com. Tell me who you think are the ones who God is raising up before us at this very difficult time. A test will come later. Just kidding. In the spirit of the prophetic Jesus, we are called to resist injustice, evil, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves, and they are presenting themselves. We are called to bind up the strong man. Do you think Trump bleeds?